a seat and please sit. Thank you. This is a very tricky time, just between the lunch, so hopefully you all have had your lunch and are ready to go for the session. Thank you. Let's start. Thank you again. Thank you all for joining us in this session. My name is Rana. I am from the Climate Group. I lead the Climate Group's governments and policy work in India and South Asia. And we warmly welcome to you to this very interesting session that we are going to have in the next one, which is on accelerating global climate actions via subnational climate leadership. We are organizing this event in collaboration with WRI India team and the UN Climate Change High-Level Champion team as well. Today, this session, the objective of this session is to showcase subnational and local climate actions from the global south, and how are these actions driving climate leadership and global climate action. The session will also put a spotlight on select champions that we have with us today, and showcase peer-to-peer learning, best practices, as well as bring out the leadership voices from the global south towards south-south collaboration on capacity building. Just after I end, there is a presentation which will be given by my colleague in WRI India, who will set the context for the session. That will follow with a very interesting panel discussion that we have today. It's a multi-geography panel. We have people from Africa. We'll have panelists from India, from Australia, several other regions from all over the world. The panel will actually talk about few elements which are very important for this whole fifth capacity building hub, which is around youth, gender, indigenous communities and groups, and also governments and civil society organizations, and how are they deliberating on the subnational climate actions globally. This will be followed by a very interesting session that we have around storytelling, where we have two very prominent and icons from the global south that we have, who will share about the leadership that they have offered to global south and the subnational regions that they are working, that they are very active on, and how they are driving, and how they had and how they are currently driving climate actions, and also to drive the global climate discourse in general. And then I think we'll just end after that with a closing and vote of thanks. So that's it from my side, and thank you again for joining us. I'll hand over to my colleague from WRI India, Saransh Bajpai, who will offer a very brief context for the day. Saransh.
Thank you so much, Rana. Good afternoon, everyone. This very interesting session on accelerating global climate actions via subnational leadership. So in my very brief presentation, I will just highlight what are some of the challenges which the global south is facing, and conclude by showing an example of the global south-south collaboration, how it has resulted in taking climate actions, sustainable development, etc. Now, if you can see this image, this is just 3 or 4 days back. This happened in a metropolitan city in India, Chennai, which is in South India. And as you can see in the picture, so the city witnessed intense rainfalls amounting to 700 to 800 mm within a span of just a few hours. And it washed away everything, including cars. So these are the impacts which we are seeing in urban areas. Now, global south is extremely vulnerable to climate change. As we know that because of the rising temperatures, the Himalayan ecosystem is witnessing, and of course at a lot of other geographies, they are witnessing glacial retreats, melting of the glaciers. Now this leads to multiple risks. One, of course, is in the downstream, there can be transboundary risk of flooding, which we are seeing in countries like India, Nepal, Pakistan. They also lead to water scarcity situation in some of the downstream areas. So lack of capacities, further accelerates these challenges in the global south. This is an image from the ongoing drought emergency in Somalia. Now this entire Horn region is, devoid of predictable rainfall, which again leads to various impacts, not just related with water availability, but also agriculture production, leading to, food challenges of food security, poverty, hunger, malnutrition, etc. So countries in the Horn region, they require peer-to-peer exchanges and learnings to build the resilience of their agriculture sector, of their water resilience, management practices. The small island developing states and countries belonging to the AOSIS region, they are facing existential risk because of sea level rise. So what is required is more global collaboration, more South-South cooperation, so that they are able to get targeted funding support, targeted research and assessments, as well as support for developing resilient infrastructure. This is an image from the Latin America, where we know the Amazon, what is happening with the Amazon rainforests. So it is disrupting the deforestation and degradation is disrupting the entire ecosystem. And which is why countries like Brazil, Peru, Colombia, etc., and the neighbors, they again require some of the things which I talked about earlier. This is my last slide. Where do subnational entities fit in this entire narrative? We understand that the climate change, the issue of climate change is a global phenomena, but then the impacts are local, as we have seen in the previous slides. And the actions also lie at local levels, which is why we are talking of South-South collaboration and cooperation. This image is from a small Indian city in the heart of India. There's a state called Madhya Pradesh. This city is Burhanpur. And this structure which you are seeing is the ancient Kanat system of water storage, water transportation and storage. Now this is a Persian architecture. It came from Persia it spread across to a few regions in Afghanistan, Mexico, India. In India, this is the only structure which is still now left. And this was in a very degraded situation. So looking at the efforts which happened in other parts of the world with the same structure, the city of Burhanpur, they took the initiative, they showed the leadership of how to conserve these structures, how to restore them to their original form. The water gets, percolated through the neighboring highlands, how to restore those degraded ecosystems so that water can flow efficiently and get stored. And with this intervention, the city has been able to substitute 15% of the water demand from these structures now, which was earlier through groundwater or through pumping from the rivers. So this is where the subnational leadership fits in. And if we have more of these peer-to-peer exchanges, these collaborations, these joint, targeted financial interventions for joint, joint concerns which the Global South has, that has the potential solution. And I would now love to hear from our stellar panel on how they are, doing some of these initiatives and taking some of these things for the benefit of us all. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Saransh, for that very thought-provoking presentation, and also stressing upon the need on, stressing on the fact, on the reasons actually on why we have all gathered here and why we need to fight together. Thanks a lot. Next is a very interesting panel that we have with us now. I'll invite my friend, my colleague from the UN High-Level Climate Champions team, Saurav Punamiya Jain, who is the moderator of this session, to take it over from here. Saurav.
Thanks, Rana, for the fantastic context also by my colleagues. So quickly, without really delving, what I'll do is I'll just call on our panelists. So Jane Lumumba from the UN High-Level Champions team as well. She's the Africa Delivery Lead. Puneet Gandhi, who works at the National Institute of Urban Affairs. And also Starleen Sharma, founding partner of Green Earth Hub. Right. So, as you've already heard my colleagues, and they've set the context and the ball rolling for subnational climate action, given that all three of y'all have had different spheres of influence at the subnational level, why don't we take 2 minutes each and start with some reflections on what your experiences have been and also some anecdotal evidence to start with. Over to you, Jane.
Thank you. Can I? Yeah, good. Subnational action for climate action is extremely important. And I think what I like to say is that the subnational ecosystem really understands what I call the transition vulnerability. We understand that, climate shocks will go hand in hand with green industrial shocks, and the less vulnerable and the least responsible for climate change impacts will be impacted. And because the subnational ecosystem, whatever you want to call them, and by mind you, it's also inclusive of rural elements, are the closest to the people. They understand their vulnerabilities better than the national governments and other stakeholders within the system, and therefore their role in ensuring that they adapt and that their resilience and their communities benefit from their leadership and their action is extremely important.
I absolutely agree with Jane, and I think just to add on to it, with subnational, especially with global south, where countries are large, it's very important to regionalize whatever we are thinking about, because otherwise it gets very difficult to even implement something, especially from national level in a country like India. When you have a standardized template of doing things, it will not work. And again, region or state-wise, it has to be customized to be able to see a better output out of it, as well as better implementation eventually. And I think that is very important.
So I would agree that very much there's a need to focus on subnational and local communities when looking at how to address climate change. Having worked in several developing countries and in India for the last 12 years, I think there's also a really fundamental need, particularly when looking at things from the lens of capital and how do we pay and how do we make these changes viable and how do we help communities see how to make it in their economic interest to support climate adaptation and climate mitigation, that we really start looking at where we can be capital efficient, where we can take models that are working in one place, replicate them with some of the customizations, but also trying to be much more capital efficient. And beyond that, my main role is very much working in the innovation ecosystem, both on financial innovations to make adoption of climate instruments viable, as well as supporting climate innovations and having in several instances worked with government, both state and city in India for adoption of climate technologies.
Right. Thanks so much for that background. I think we often tend to get lost in high-level talk, so why don't we delve into some solutions, some best practices. And one of those solutions that we discovered when we were working at the Climate High-Level Champions team is at the National Institute of Urban Affairs. They've developed a very interesting reporting platform so that cities can report back their climate resilient benchmarks. And what we decided then is, why don't we use that particular solution and see whether there is any scope or appetite for other nations in the global south to also adopt it. So given that, we decided then that why don't we join hands and have the particular platform that Puneet is going to talk about into the main frame of what we call as the Race to Resilience campaign. And we're very happy to announce that the particular platform is now a partner platform for the Race to Resilience. So Puneet, why don't you start with explaining what is all that about and also how that is helping over 200 cities in India.
Thank you so much. And yeah, we are very glad to be part of Race to Resilience campaign as NIUA and Climate Center for Cities. So I'll just give a brief context of what we do so that everyone understands from where we are coming and what we are doing. So at Climate Center for Cities, we are implementing a framework called Climate Smart Cities Assessment Framework, developed by Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs at Government of India. And the idea is that we want cities to start considering climate change as an important factor while going in their day-to-day functions. And for that, we have done is broken down different kinds of city systems and services required and put them in different indicators. So we have 5 thematic areas which are subdivided into 28 different indicators. Thematic areas broadly being water management, waste management, urban planning, green cover, biodiversity, your energy and green building, as well as mobility and air quality. So something that cities are directly working with in certain capacity. So when now, this started back in 2019, and now in 2023, we have more than 220 cities who have reported on this platform in India, impacting almost 250 million people in India, in urban India specifically. So the idea is that we don't want to just help cities see where do they stand in terms of either mitigation or adaptation. And we have integrated both those components very inorganically into, organically into this system. So, but while doing that, they also are able to move to the next level. So we have made it more progressive in nature to make sure that, let's say today any city is at level 1, in the next year they can reach level 2 and then subsequently up to level 5 to showcase their impacts. And that is what from governance level as well we have included that are there any bylaws or something that can be created for each of those indicators. So while doing that, we also figured out that the biggest challenge is the capacity on ground. And how do, while we are thinking about it from high level, okay, we can do this and this is how we'll do it. But the people who are actually driving this change don't know what is climate change and how does that impact their specific day-to-day work. And for that reason, we created 26 different training modules, which every different line departments in the city can pick up and can learn on. So now we are also converted into a MOOC course to make it easily accessible for everyone. Everyone in the line departments can now also learn something like this. It will be a 2-hour exercise, of which only half an hour would be a lecture followed by 1.5 hours of a hands-on training of what they can do for their city. To make sure that cities are able to showcase how they can move forward, what needs to be done, how it can be done. And all these things are then showcased onto our platform, Climate Data Observatory, which is transparent enough to showcase all the data that is collected from the cities. And while doing all these things on the capacity building front, I'll also say we have developed certain games to make sure that the learnings are more interactive in nature for city officials, and they are able to understand why certain things needs to be done and how it can be done.
Right. Thanks a lot, Puneet. I think given the crisis we are in, collaboration starts from today. So Jane, I want to go to you and just want to hear some thoughts. Right, yeah. So before I get into that, I think we have our 4th panelist here, Braulina, who works at Anmiga. Can we have you on stage? We're glad you made it. Right, so I was at Collaboration Starts Today, and you've heard Puneet. So probably you can tell us how far out is it possible for cities in Africa to be able to adopt this? Can we have a partnership going starting today? And second, what according to you, just give us an account on best practices or some inspiring case studies that you've seen in Africa.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, indeed, partnership and collaboration is critical to ensuring that the subnational ecosystem gets to the core and the center of climate action in their various jurisdictions. And I like what you said about capacity building, and I'm going to give one very interesting example in Kenya that is still being implemented, and it's a really fantastic case of showcasing leadership, not only at the subnational level, but really capacitating cities. The government of Kenya has launched sort of the first national model of decentralizing funds to all 47 counties. For those of you who know Kenya, we have 47 counties, all 47 counties, which include cities and rural areas. And these funds are decentralized to strengthen the capacity of various subnational entities to deliver on climate action. And they call this financing locally led adaptation. I don't know why they chose the word locally led. It is locally led, but I would have loved subnational, city somewhere in there, to really emphasize the role of cities in this transition. And what they do is that it's a participatory climate risk assessment action planning model where the cities engage communities directly. They work together to assess their risks, understand their risks, because cities are working for the people. So people need to be able to understand what are the risks that we are exposed to, how vulnerable are we, so there's an element of vulnerability mapping, and how can we mitigate and adapt to these risks. And what is interesting is that these funds, so the funds sit at the national treasury, and the funds are not just given to cities and local governments and counties. What they do is that it's a performance-based performance for results grant. So there's certain specific conditions that various cities, various local governments, various rural elements have to meet. And one of the things that I like about this fund is that 1% of revenue collected at the local level has to go into a climate budget. So what you're doing is that you're not telling cities, hey, this is money from government, do A, B, C, D, is that you also have to learn how to plan, to budget, and report and implement various climate action based on your climate risk assessments. So it's a very multi-pronged, very holistic approach to showcasing subnational leadership, but also capacitating beyond the project and showing cities that they need to be able to also fund some of these elements themselves. Gone are the days where we're relying on the national coffers. Cities are generating revenue. We have to be able to be creative and innovative on how we collect revenue and how we then distribute that revenue to address issues, climate change impacts, whether it's floods, whether it's a drought, whatever it is, and engage the communities. Again, what we're seeing in this model that Floka is showcasing is that there's an element of just transition. We're engaging communities, we're engaging indigenous knowledge and local knowledge systems to influence the various projects that are coming out of this. So it's a really interesting case study. I'll stop there and yeah.
No, that's super helpful, but we all know that everything stops at finance and access to finance. How these financial arrangements are made are super critical. So I want to go to you, Starlene, but before that, because Brownlina is here and we're glad you made it, why don't we start with you describing what does Anmiga exactly do? And also then just a little bit, let's touch base with finance here. Can you provide details on the climate fund being launched by the Association of Indigenous Peoples of Brazil and the coordination of indigenous organizations of the Brazilian Amazon? That's the news we are hearing, that it's going to be launched at COP28. So if that's the case, if you could give some context over that as well, that'd be super helpful. Thanks.
Partners who will channel them to the right decision makers. شمال افريقيا والشرق الاوسط يدعموا الشباب العربي.
Boa tarde. Teria que ter o microfone para você.
Good afternoon.
Sou Braulina Baniwa.
I am Braulina Baniwa.
Estou aqui enquanto articulação nacional das mulheres indígenas do Brasil.
I'm here as with the delegation of National Association of Indigenous Women.
E no Brasil, com relação a essa temática, reconhecer nossos planos de vida e planos de manejo territoriais é essencial.
And in Brazil, we have to recognize our plans of life and also the management of our territory.
Uma das nossas ações
One of our actions
é falar com relação ao racismo ambiental,
is to speak up about the environmental racism
pela voz das mulheres indígenas,
for the indigenous women's voice,
trazendo o debate
bringing up the debate
que o corpo das mulheres
that the indigenous women's body,
é um território
it's a territory,
que precisa ser respeitado.
that it needs to be respected.
Então esse processo
So this process,
segue na resistência
it continues to be a resistance
e na luta
for the fight.
para que todas as ações
So all the actions
relacionadas ao clima,
towards the climate,
justiça,
justice,
possam envolver diretamente as mulheres
can involve all women
e que elas sejam escutadas
and they can be heard
em diferentes gerações,
in different generations,
para que os conhecimentos indígenas
so the indigenous knowledge
e das mulheres indígenas
and indigenous women
também estejam
also can be
no centro de debate,
in a debate central,
sendo valorizadas
being valued
em diferentes lugares.
in different spaces.
Em uma das nossas ações é ir para os territórios,
One of our actions is to go to the territories,
formando novas lideranças mulheres,
leading another indigenous leaders,
para que elas continuem
so they can defending
os nossos territórios
our territories
contra violações
against violations
e violências
and violence
que a gente tem sofrido com relação a garimpo,
that we have been suffering from mining,
madeireiros,
woodworkers
que têm invadido nossos territórios.
that have been invading our territories.
Acreditamos
We believe
que somente a formação,
that only by formation,
conhecer e falar outras línguas,
to know and understand another languages,
nos possibilitará
can possibility
ocupar
to occupy
e defender
and defend
os povos indígenas,
indigenous people,
mulheres indígenas
indigenous women
e seus territórios.
and their territories.
Porque às vezes a gente nunca está nesse espaço,
Because sometimes we are not in those places,
mas existe necessidade emergencial de ocupar.
but there is emergency need to be in those places.
Porque somente nós
Because we
podemos falar
can talk,
o que passamos e
because
sofremos
we pass through and also suffer
com relação à crise climática nos territórios.
with the climate change in our territories.
E seguiremos na luta
And we'll keep fighting
por nós
for us
e pelas que virão.
and for those who come,
E nunca mais espaço sem os povos
and
indígenas.
never a place without indigenous people.
Obrigada.
Thank you.
That's really inspiring. So, with that, Stalin, why don't we listen from you some perspectives over financial arrangements, what works, what doesn't work with the governments. It's a big task, and you've been in the thick of it for so long. So, over to you.
Yes, so when we think about how to use climate finance for supporting local communities, I think there's a couple different mechanisms. First and foremost, in Maharashtra, there's been fantastic work done around working with being the first state in India to pledge for net zero. And then once that was done, developing clean air action plans for each of the cities. Post that, there was a lot of work done to upgrade the skills and do capacity building of the local and city officials that were responsible for implementing climate change. But as cities are very different size, their needs are very different. And the tools of administrators and the capacity building of administrators are not always the right tools to help them identify the right solutions and the economics that are going to make them work. So in one instance, we worked with the 19 non-performing cities around their Clean Air Action Plans, understood their needs in terms of what they were looking for from an innovation perspective or a tool, instrument, climate, technology perspective. And rather than sending professionals who are great at what they do, but who aren't meant to be technical experts on 12 different types of technologies, who are not meant to be experts on different types of financial instruments. And we curated groups of climate technologies that we had done various levels of lab validation and field validation on, so that one, there was a comfort in selecting technologies, and two, in many instances, we worked with the technologies or the innovators to build business models that would be easier for different cities to adopt. You know, the requirements of a city like Mumbai that wants to do very large procurement all at once is very difficult for a startup to participate in many cases, because the tendering size is very large and the scale of implementation is very large. On the flip side, a lot of smaller cities where an official might be working on, say, 5 different portfolios may not have the capacity to go through a tendering process. So can we develop an instrument or model where the startups can implement the technology without that difficulty, prove it, and then enable scale up with the officials? So I think that there's a lot that can be done in terms of working with officials and providing them tools, not just capacity, because we shouldn't expect an official administrator to also know physics, chemical engineering, biotech, and any of a number of other factors they may need, and how to make the economics on those work. But very alternatively from that, we've also done work with local and indigenous communities, not directly, but we've financed organizations where in areas where farmland had been fully degraded and not farmed for 5 years, we worked with institutions around how to reforest the land, how to access carbon markets, and how to build business models around this, both so that the land that was not being farmed is now reforested, there's income coming off of it from the reforested land, and the families who own that land are receiving payments from carbon credits that would be above what it would be if they were farming. So there's an economic benefit to maintain and support the reforested land and not chop it down, not reform it as the land is rejuvenated. And the organization that we built this out with and spent a lot of time around the business model and the economics has since raised 12 crore, which is about $1.5 million, to dramatically start expanding this work. So one of the things I like to say is, when we think about finance, is it's difficult when we're not understanding it, but a lot of times it's really just like a puzzle. What is risk? How do we value risk? And after that, if we have something that has clean, observable results, which pretty much everything with climate does, then it's a question of algebra and how do we value and de-risk and put the right numbers and the right financial instruments into place.
Thanks. So we're about time, but just 20 seconds intervention starting from Jane. And what I'd like to know is, and the audience I'm sure would also like to know is, give a wish list of the things you'd want to ensure that we can build more momentum for subnational climate action.
Again, just going back to the issue of finance, we need to be able to trust cities. I think it's an issue of trust cities with climate finance, and just as my colleague said, be able to just clearly de-risk these projects, reduce the time spent on transactions so that we can get climate action moving quickly, because at the end of the day, people are suffering, communities are struggling, and we need to be able to support them, and we need to be able to trust cities and get the money crowded in as quickly as possible.
I think when we consider India, we have like 4,900 cities. So to start off, it's also important to understand from the point of where do challenge lies in the city. And they don't have that capacity to do it. So somewhere targeting a small corpus around what city challenges are and streamlining it for city, so that with years to come, it's easier to fund those things in certain kind of prioritization. So somewhere that kind of technical assistance grants for each city around climate might be helpful moving forward.
I think the best thing that we can do is really take time to find the solutions that are working and create a platform to recognize and share those learnings, and also be very cognizant of how do we take the learnings, understand what can be applied elsewhere and what needs to be localized to the custom. But I think that in taking time to recognize the people who are leaders, it really creates a mechanism and incentive both for them to keep going and for others to follow in their footsteps.
Acredito também que seja a valorização das tecnologias sociais dos territórios.
I believe also that we can value the social technology,
porque elas existem nos territórios,
because they exist on the territories,
e precisa que sejam considerados como ciência para desacelerar a crise climática.
And they need to be considered as science and to decelerate.
E esse financiamento, de fato, ela precisa chegar nas pontas e que não fique só nas instituições.
And those finances has to be on the communities and not only on the institutions.
Porque os mais impactados são os que estão nos territórios e nas periferias.
Because the most impacted ones are the ones that live in the territories and also in also in the territories.
Então existe essa necessidade de um olhar humano.
So it exists. We have to look with a human eye
para a diversidade de povos,
to diversify our indigenous people
que existem no mundo,
that exist in the world,
e que são humanos,
that are human beings,
e que precisam ser respeitados e valorizados a partir das suas ciências.
And they need to be valued and respected towards their science.
Por isso que há necessidade de eles serem protagonistas nesse processo.
That's why we need to be the leaders of this process.
Obrigada.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And with that, I'll conclude the panel, probably with a quick picture of the panelists, and then I hand it over to Rana to take us with to the next segment of storytelling.
Thank you, Saurav. Thank you, Saurav, and all the panelists. Quickly moving to... Okay, we are having it now. Okay. Fascinating speakers among us today. Sonia Cooper, she will talk about the First Peoples of Australia and the indigenous communities, and she has an extraordinary experience to share with us now. Sonia, yeah, just inviting you. Please come over. Next, we have the pleasure and honor of having Mr. Aditya Thackeray with us. He is a former Environment Minister of Maharashtra, and he's going to share about his experience and the great work that he has done and want to do for not only for the state but for the entire world. Sonia, first, you.
Oh, great. Oh, okay. Thank you. Yeah, I wanted to acknowledge I'm on a different country, and it's my second time out of Australia. Our voices as Indigenous people on the ground in Australia are really quite different. I belong to the Yorta Yorta people, and my people have not had an opportunity to address what is climate change, let alone trying to understand what climate change is. The image that you see right now is from my country. This is the Murray River. and it's where the Goulburn runs into the Murray River. This river has been managed by the federal government, but water has not been, how can I say, while we have water impacts, water and climate are interconnected, and everything that that we are facing on country has a lot to do with the government's decision making around what they do with my country. These images that you can see, this is the lake system on Yorta Yorta country. We have, when water is there, it actually replenishes things, and so there are less climate impacts when we have water. I noticed that. There are a lot of green, our vegetation is surviving, there's more fish. This picture here of country is our lake system, and this is what we refer to as our kidneys. On the left-hand side is the Moira Lake, and the right-hand side is also the Moira Lake. The middle bit that you see is the border that makes up the New South Wales and Victorian border. Climate change is impacting our country in different levels, and the way that we're addressing climate is through our elders. So we ask the elders, what is it that we can do? And they also ask us, what is climate change? The impacts that we're seeing is because of higher temperatures and low rainfall, and also the mismanagement of our water system. We have these large banks of our river system slumping and falling into the river. We have no voice on the ground. As First Nations people, we talk to our governments and no one is listening to us. So the way that we address our climate action is to mobilise together, to talk to all of our other First Nations, and to start dialogues called the National Indigenous Climate Change Dialogues, where we can actually come together to talk about, hey, what's happening on your country? What are you doing on your country? In my country, we don't own any country, so we don't own any land. No lands have been returned to my people. And so it is hard for us to address these issues. So while we have climate issues, we also have human rights issues occurring. This is just within our waterways. This is a major river system, but it's all the way through our creeks and on our wetlands. My country is dying. Yorta Yorta country is disappearing. The trees are falling into the river. The trees are cracking. The soil is being impacted. And with the latest State of the Environment report coming from Australia, and luckily enough I was the Indigenous author for the climate chapter for Australia, we've noted that the next 5 years is going to impact our soils greatly. And so the forest is full of carbon capture. The trees can only take on so much, and the soils can only take so much. I guess my country's in trouble, and we can't, our voices are not heard unless we actually speak up and go to events and talk up and have these climate change conferences. So the very first meeting that took place with the elders was in 2008. Then in 2012, we invited Indigenous people from all around the world to Yorta Yorta country to talk about what is climate. In 2018, we came up with a climate change conference statement where we said we want to collaborate and we want to work with governments, but we also want governments to listen to us. If they're not going to listen to us, then we're not going to be getting anywhere. So we feel like sometimes we're in a deep hole in the inner core of this earth because no one can hear us. Our waterways are being used in a way in which accelerates climate. So while I say that, different impacts of higher temperatures and low rainfall is occurring in my country, climate change can be a primary, secondary and a third impact, and can operate on different layers. My job is to work on country and to do the cultural assessments for the elders. So what I do is I'm on the waterways on a boat, or I'm in the river system, or I'm in the wetlands looking at assessing what is going on. And then my main job is to apply a climate layer over every aspect of work that I do on country. This tree was hit by a lightning, so that means that the drier forest means that it's more prevalent to lightning strikes. We haven't had a fire in this part of the country, but it's certainly on the cards. So my country is definitely changing forever, and climate change is accelerating the process. There were many different things that we've done on the ground. I'll just mention some of the things that we've been doing. Sorry, just bear with me. In 2015 to 2018, we've tried to build relationships around governance and event preparations. So we've tried to go, okay, well, with the Earth Systems hub for the government, we've tried to build the relationship from a federal level down. Yeah, I understand subnational leadership is extremely important, but if our voices are not heard, then we can't lead at that level where we can teach others about what's happening. In 2012, we had the NCAF Monash University's Climate Change International Conference, and then in 2019, we held the Indigenous Symposium on Climate Change, which was the AMOS conference, in which a lot of Indigenous people attended to tell their climate stories. In 2021, we went to Cairns in Queensland just to talk about, with the Yidinji mob, and bring all of other Indigenous people across Australia to talk about what the impacts of climate are. One of the big questions I asked, and Puneet, you said this before, is that I asked, what is climate change? And a lot of Indigenous people, no one answered. There were varying different responses, and a scientist got up and he said, this is what climate change is. It's, can be from anthropogenic processes, and it's changing the way things are on country. And I said, is that your only answer? And he said, no. And I said, how many definitions of climate change are there? He says, thousands of different definitions. So when I talk to someone about climate, then we're not actually talking about change. We're not actually talking about the same thing. So we realise that these issues are really quite different. We haven't even determined what parts of my country are suffering with climate change, let alone have a conversation with government at a federal level about how do we sort of collaborate and work together, because they usually have their own agenda. We got our own agenda, and we still haven't worked out how we're going to come and work together. The last thing that I just wanted to mention was we are developing a paper which is a collaboration between Western science and Indigenous people, and I'm one of those authors as well, and it's about how do you integrate the sciences or the knowledge. Is our knowledge science? I mean, it's just knowledge, I suppose. What we know about country is something that's been handed down. It's not something that's just been developed out of the blue. And I think there's got to be a real understanding between Western scientists and Indigenous people on the ground as to what that actually means, and a lot more respect needs to occur. My soils are in trouble, so these soils are being impacted further, not only by climate, but many, many different processes. That's just a story about the cracking clays. I talk about the cracking clays because that's where the carbon atoms bounce off, and no doubt they go back up into the atmosphere. One of the things that we talk about a lot is irreversible damage, and that the Rio Declaration 15, the precautionary approach and the principle we say to government must be included in all dialogues. And my final point is we cannot solve our problems, Einstein, with the same thinking we used when we created them. I see this same circular thinking, and because of that, once you notice it and you recognise it, you can actually change the course of how our voices as First Nations can be elevated. You can actually pick the difference. I wanted to, is that my time up now? Sorry? Yes. So I just wanted to say that we're also developing what's called an National Indigenous Dialogues Climate Stories platform. We want to develop a platform. This is a lot of the work that a lot of the First Nations from each of the territories and states in Australia are operating from. And they said, how do we share our stories? Because no one else is going to share our stories. So maybe we should come up with a platform where we decide what goes in the platform, where we decide what levels of consent goes in that platform, where we can decide and make all the rules about who can get to interact with us and what we say. Look, collaboration on addressing climate change is important, A lot of people come to us with a lot of projects, and a lot of those projects don't actually align with anything that we have to do with on country, because we're satisfying somebody else's, efforts to reduce emissions, and that's not a problem. But at the same time, I saw that there's a race to zero emissions. There's also a race to still be living here, because our knowledge is disappearing at the rate in which carbon emissions is happening. So it's actually impacting our country and our people greatly. But we still don't know what the stories are, in terms of what is climate change, what is climate science, and whether we actually agree with it is a whole nother story. But we do believe that it is occurring, and the elders in my country are very concerned about that. So it actually gets deeper. There's about human rights issues, cultural violations. We address these in our negotiations as we move forward with government. I think that's about it. Thank you.
Thanks, Sonia. That was really mind-boggling, and we are really proud of your mission that you're working towards. All the best for your work. Thanks. Now we have the honor of having among us the former Environment Minister of the state of Maharashtra in India. I have no hesitation in saying that Aditya has been the most iconic youth climate leader of our times. Aditya, would like to hear from you. We all are waiting to hear from you how actually you have changed the way we used to look at subnational climate action mainly in India and the global south, and how have you actually in your times, and really you are still continuing and you want to do in terms of how you want to change the face of subnational leadership and the work that we want to do both in India and across the world. Your vision about the people and the planet, everything. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Actually, hopped onto the stage way before there could be more good words coming my way, because that just adds up to the pressure while someone's in a storytelling session. To introduce myself to all of you, very briefly, I am Aditya Thackeray. I was a minister in Maharashtra, which is about 130 million people. It's a state in India. And I'm probably the youngest former environment minister that you could have probably ever seen. I'm just 33. When I took office, I was 29. Youngest former, not because climate change did me in, but a political change did me in. And hoping to get back to where I was very soon, but that's a story for a different day. I'll tell you very briefly what we could achieve in terms of the state of Maharashtra from 2019 to almost 2022 mid, and what I firmly believe could be the way ahead for all of us as subnational governments around the world. For me, I always consider myself and my term as something that was easy breezy, and yet, the breeze was from the headwinds, not the tailwinds exactly, because obviously it makes it a little easy when you're chief minister, not just because, and I don't want to sound entitled or, in that sense, but not just because he was my father, but when your chief minister actually believes, when your first minister, when your boss actually believes in climate action, and when he's a conservationist himself, I think things become a lot more easier for you when you're the Minister for Environment, Climate Change, and when you're working on it. So I believe that was one of the biggest things. The headwinds really were that when we took office in 2019 December, within the first 3 months of a very ambitious budget of the state which would invest in climate action, we were, as a part of what we call Planet Earth, facing one of the biggest pandemics of our time, COVID-19. And obviously all of us had to be masked up in a lockdown, and yet we thought, let's try something which will really lead to climate action. What was very interesting is during COVID-19, we saw that our cities were locked down. All of us as human beings were in our homes, formal homes, informal homes, locked up in cities, locked up in rural areas. And a lot of us saw restoration of nature happening actively in front of our eyes. Cities like Mumbai could spot dolphins from a certain distance. You could see peacocks in our streets in a couple of areas. You had leopards roam around on the roads in our forest nearby. I think nature was healing itself. I think that was the most beautiful part of it. But I've always believed that for us as India, this is our moment in history to actually take the lead, take the leadership role and make that impact in climate action. And I don't say this out of a political will. I don't say this out of any bias for my country or against anyone else. I just strongly believe that we're at this moment in time, we're this inflection point where India has almost 1.3 billion people. Very soon, I think we'll be the largest, or we probably already are the largest population in the world. And it's only going to grow. It's going to grow over the next 15, 20 years. I was just listening to stats that we'll probably be 1 billion people in the working population only between 15 to 65 over the next 15 or 20 years. That's the scale that we're looking at in terms of human population. Now, when you look at human populations as such, like I said, our state is 130 million people. India currently is at 1.3 billion people. The problem really lies in whether we look at this as a moment in history to change ourselves or to do what we're doing as a country in terms of what we call as development. A lot of us in different states today are looking at sustainable development, are looking at sustainability practices, are looking back at worshipping nature, because most of us as Indians, we come from a heritage of nature worshippers. We've worshipped the 5 elements of nature. What has happened over a period of time is the nature that we worship, the 5 elements that we worshipped, when we converted them to idols and brought them into our temples and other religious places, we've started polluting the exact same things that we worshipped. And that is where the problem lies now. We want bigger roads. Yes, we need them. We need bigger cities. We absolutely need them. We want more formal homes, and we want flyovers, and we want tunnels. And that is the requirement of us. That is the requirement of a growing country. For us, more energy usage is going to mean development. Yes, we all need that. But when we look at climate action, how do you channelize the ambitions, the needs, the requirements of 1 billion plus people in a world that's actually moving towards calamity of climate? We need to realize that as 1 billion plus people who have aspirations, hopes, we're on the verge of coming into the global north very soon in terms of development, in terms of our, the way we have standard of living growing. I think we also need to realize, how do you channelize that into just transition, into climate action, and very importantly, a better future for all of us, including a better present for us today. And here is where I firmly believe that subnational governments can actually lead the change. I remember my first COP, it was COP26 in Scotland, and that's where our Prime Minister Modi, has actually given the date of 2070 for the whole country to go carbon neutral. And as states, of course, we have to go with the national government, we have to go with our national commitments. But I firmly believe that we can help our country, our union government, our leadership, central leadership, as states, to probably achieve some of the goals much earlier than 2070. 2070, we must understand, is not the first state of achieving it, it's the last state of achieving it. So for example, states like Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, there's West Bengal, there's a couple of more states that are really doing some good work. There's Delhi, there's Punjab trying to come into the race. All of us are actually trying to do our bits to come into the race of climate action. For me, as the minister in Maharashtra, I had the beautiful opportunity to work with all the partners, and I actually have a lot of deja vu here with United Nations, but more than that, climate group, WRI, Race to Zero, because I remember interacting with Rana out here, Saurabh, my colleague. He started helping us connect with Race to Zero, Race to Resilience, Cities for Forest, Women for Climate, all of these initiatives. And actually we started working on trying to make our cities better, our districts better. I'm not going to take much of your time, but I'm going to give you 4 or 5 examples where we actually could drive change in just short points. First was the requirement for electric mobility. I've always been a believer that electric mobility cannot be only preached to the people. As governments, we need to start where we preach. So we brought in the EV 2021 policy. We were working with Rocky Mountain Institute. We were working with a couple of more partner agencies. We brought in the best sort of people in research. And when we made the policy, we kept it dynamic. Every 3 months, we would speak to the stakeholders, right from OEMs to customers to people in the industry, try to change it, try to make it more today. And how do you make it better for the people who can adopt and go for more EVs? The impact of that was 2018-2019, Maharashtra had about 3,000 EVs in the entire state. By 2023, that is, we speak today, we have 300,000 plus EVs in the state of Maharashtra. I think that is the impact. A good policy coming in, and I'm not saying good because of me, I was just a part of it, I was a small, humble part of it. It is all the people who are here, WRI, climate group people, who have helped us. But that is the way you can actually preach and move on action in terms of moving from ambition to action. What was very important in that policy was that we focused on 2 bases. One, of course, helping the customers, the citizens, adopt EV, but the other one was, of course, change our public transport fleet to electric mobility. So, for example, the BST buses, that is the lifeline of Mumbai today, our aim was to hit 10,000 buses that will be electric by 2027. We've already got almost 500 electric buses. Some of them are double-deckers, and we would have hit 10,000 electric buses by 2027. We started helping our cities with Race to Zero. We had climate action plans ready. We started moving on them. There's Mumbai Climate Action Plan, Pune, Solapur, a couple of more, and we committed 44 cities that are million-plus populations to Race to Zero. Now imagine 44 million people, or 44 cities with a million-plus population committing to Race to Zero. All the administrators, all the mayors, all the elected representatives in cities and those districts, in those regions, committing to actually a better lifestyle. I think what I firmly believe here is this is not just about climate, this is not about sustainability. This is much more. I think this is the basic for what a government works. The main policy of government has to be helping people pursue happiness, pursue freedom, pursue a better standard of living, elevate. Don't worry, that's the future. It's okay. He or she is probably agreeing with me. So we have to help people better their standard of living. Now, when we start planning, practicing better methods of city planning, of village planning, of district planning, you have better green areas, you do contour mapping, you do heat mapping, you do better roads that are internal, by-lanes, footpaths, make it pedestrianized, make better spaces for parks and gardens for children to be safe, for women to be safe, for men to be safe. We're not just impacting and creating a better environment and better nature-based solutions, but we're actually bettering a city and bettering a district. I think that is where our development lies, and that is where future lies. Some of the things we could do in terms of environment and conservation of wildlife, just like I was speaking about people, because wildlife, nature, environment is equally important. In the span of 2.5 years, we could protect 15,000 hectares of mangrove and bring it into the official protection of the Indian Forest Act 1927. We could declare 30 conservation reserves, 3 Ramsar sites. All of this in a span of 2.5 years. Like I said, it just makes it easier when you have beautiful partners who believe in impact, who believe in action, and who believe in terms of taking everyone together on one board, one table. But then, going further, there are just 3 or 4 points I would like to highlight where I believe we as subnational governments could really take the message of the world and of our countries and our national commitments to the people. 1, make this climate issue a political message beyond political ideologies. You will always have ideologies that are left, right, center, open, close, inward, outward. You'll have ideologies that are radicals, ideologies that are moderate. But when climate disasters hit you, they don't see your color, they don't see your race, they don't see your background, they don't see your genealogy. They look at us as a part of the entire planet. So I think we need to go beyond our ideologies and make this a mainstream political talk. 2, I think what is very important for us is to actually break the jargons of climate action, because most of us, 100,000 people who've gathered here at COP28, probably understand what NDCs mean and what 1.5 degrees means to the world and 2 degrees means to the world. But for us, when we take the stage and talk to the people, how do we make it simple? How do we make it understandable for the common person who does not want to really understand whether the person is taking an electric bus or a diesel bus, because the person is actually making his or her ends meet and wanting to go back to office and come back home in time. For us, it's important that we translate this action into common words, common usage, common understanding, so that we know the impact of our actions. And 3, we have to take this to schools. We have to make, for example, we as the government of Maharashtra had included with UNICEF a syllabus for environment that is updated, because most of our syllabus is now about 15, 20 years ago, when we thought, according to the beautiful movie that actually triggered me into climate action, that all of this was the day after tomorrow. We need to realize that cities can lead the way, subnational governments can lead the way, and climate action and climate disasters, whatever we choose, is not for the day after tomorrow, but it is for today. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Aditya. Just cannot thank you more for sharing about your vision, about your thoughts and views about the planet, people, and the entire community. Thanks a lot. We don't have time to summarize the session, but it will be very difficult to summarize the session, first of all. But just would like to thank everyone for joining us, all the speakers. Sonia, Aditya, thanks a lot for being here and for joining us in this whole the fight that we are fighting together, and let's all stay connected, and let's all fight this together, because we cannot afford to kind of fight in silos and in isolation. So just would like to thank you all, because the next session is about to begin. Have a great rest of the COP, everyone. Thank you.